everybody. This is Sophia Nelson, host of the Forward Party's Fireside Chats. This is our last one of 2025, and of course, we've saved the best for last. Joining me this evening, and we will be streaming this live. It is pre-recorded, but we'll be streaming it all through Thursday, Friday, and the weekend. We're going to be talking about the elections in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the coming midterms, the state of our country. Can a third party really change this country, and can we get it going here in the Commonwealth? All those things are on the table. So joining me now is Mayor Brian Vincent. And Brian, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So a little bit about you, for those that don't know you, you are the mayor of Farmville, Virginia, which is one of our cities it's outside of Richmond, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Farmville, Virginia is about an hour west of Richmond, Virginia.
So tell me a little bit about you and tell me how you became mayor, and you're an independent, which makes your story very interesting.
Yes, I am. So I ran for town council here in the town of Farmville in 2018 and was elected to a 4-year term, and then ran for mayor following that. I live in a town my wife grew up in, so I did not grow up here. I grew up a military kid. My father was in the Army, went to West Point Army Academy, and was killed in service to the country when I was 14. So that was kind of a seminal moment for me that impacted my life. And his service to the country, oftentimes when he was away, he would write to us about what that sacrifice meant, as not only for him but for our family, and what those central tenets associated with West Point of duty, honor, country meant to him and what they meant to us as a family. And so now in my service in a much different scale and in my mind sometimes a smaller scale, I bring those same sort of values to what I do. And so I became the mayor of the small town of Farmville. It's a town of about 7,800. We're a 2-college town. So we have Hampton-Sydney College, which is an all-male school, historic school, and then Longwood University as well. And we are a pretty unique area in that we stand historically at the end of the Civil War and the beginning of civil rights. So General Lee was retreating, General Grant was advancing, and they tried to blow the high bridge here in Farmville to halt the advance of the Union troops. The Confederate troops failed at that. Union troops were able to advance across the high bridge here in Farmville, which led to the subsequent surrender in nearby Appomattox. Civil War comes to a close. More recent times, we had a 16-year-old named Barbara Johns who staged a student-led walkout in protest of what were obviously separate and not equal school systems. And her case, she eventually met up with some lawyers from Richmond, and her case was folded into Brown versus Board of Education, changed the scope of public education in America. And so we have quite the storied history that we walk through every day. Barbara Johns will soon grace Statutory Hall.
Yep.
And represent Virginia, which is quite a great statement for our little town of Farmville. So it's a great reminder that democracy is participation, and that even if your voice you may feel as if it doesn't matter, you can affect great change.
I'm smiling because Barbara Johns is such a great American civil rights hero, and Virginia is such this interesting place. I always, from the first moment I set foot here when I was in high school and stayed at Marymount College as a page on the hill, that's where they had us living then. And then I, various times, and then ultimately went to law school at W&L, and, I've lived here ever since. Virginia is a storied place because America truly begins here in 1607. And then, of course, slavery starts here in 1619. And then you went through the history from, if we go back to the founding fathers and the American Revolution, and we go all the way through to the Civil War and Jim Crow, and then into the Civil Rights movement, Virginia is really the birthplace of it all, and where a lot happens, certainly as the northernmost state in the South. And so I think that it's wonderful though to have you share that story and to know it, because that's something I think we can agree in our country right now sorely lacking. People don't know their history on the
Right.
most base level, right? And I think the first question I would ask you, but before I get to that, I want to say my heart broke when you were sharing about your dad. I'm also an Army brat, born in Munich, Germany. My dad was stationed on Checkpoint Charlie, which doesn't exist anymore on the Berlin Wall. And, you know, Army family, going all the way back, grandfather, great grandfather, all of that, brothers, uncles. So I was excited when you were sharing West Point, your dad's story, and then you said he lost his life in service to his country, gave his life in service to his country. And man, Brian, that's tough. And to lose your dad that way at 14 and, your mom lose her husband and your siblings lose their dad, that had to be a game changer in many ways. And probably still is to this day. Right. And
Absolutely.
want to just say how much I appreciate, and I know that our listeners appreciate the sacrifice of your dad and your family, because the military families sacrifice everything when something like this happens, and it's not something that can be replaced. So thank you, and my heart goes out to you as a fellow Army brat, and so
Yeah, I
thank
appreciate
you.
that.
But my first question is, why are you an independent? Why not a Republican? Why not a Democrat? Talk to me.
I don't fit neatly into any box, right? I think increasingly we see that across America, more and more folks identify as independent than ever before. And I've always kind of been that way. I don't my ideas and my ideologies don't fit neatly into any box. Like I said, I grew up in a kind of a Reagan Republican household, military household. But it was also a household that was based off of a certain level of integrity and service, and a patriotism that wasn't chest beating, but was beating heart.
Mm,
And so I don't fit, I feel like, in any of the parties. And as I came into a voting youth, I realized that pretty early on. I remember living in North Carolina where you could actually register as an independent, and I did
mm,
so then. And when I came back to Virginia, I grew up in the 757 for a portion of my life from sixth
mhm,
grade through high school,
yeah.
in the Hampton Roads area. And so, in Virginia, we don't have that ability, but I loved the ability to vote open primary, to vote in whatever
Mhm,
primary I chose.
mhm,
And
mhm.
and I have voted all over the place. My I just feel like as an independent person who's constantly reflecting, it's hard to adhere to a litmus test that most of the partisan parties these days demand. And I don't have the capacity to toe that line.
Dig into
I
that
was
for me. As Oprah would say, let's put a pin in that and let's stop there for a moment. What is it that you believe in this moment as we here in the Commonwealth head into a pretty big election? We're going to elect for the first time in our 400-year history, a woman as
Yep.
governor. But it is very ugly and nasty. Texts had surfaced in the attorney general's race have been, in my opinion, a game changer. It'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see who wins that race. My belief is that if Spanberger really has a 10 to 12 point lead, the whole Democratic ticket wins. It'll still be tight at the bottom, but I think that'll be hard for Mayorkas to overcome. If it's tighter, I think he has a shot. But I bring that up to set the table to say, what do you see from the two parties right now here in Virginia? We'll talk about the national scale in a moment, but what do you see as an independent about kind of where we've gotten with the Democrats over here and the Republicans over here? And then, of course, this redistricting is another subject.
Yeah, yeah, the redistricting thing is unfortunate, and I think as a forward affiliated individual who willingly signed that pledge for the Forward Party, one of those tenets was around nonpartisan redistricting, and so
Mm-hmm.
I am against partisan redistricting. And I think, though, it speaks to what we've seen on a national level, and now we see on a state level. It's increasingly starting to filter down to my level, which is this reciprocal escalation of tactics,
Right.
right?
Tit for tat.
And yeah, and ultimately that doesn't lead anywhere good. You spoke of Jay Jones in the text, and it was like there was a moment there for the Democratic Party to say, enough's enough. This has to stop. This person should not be running. They chose not to do that.
Mhm.
Now, there's all kinds of whataboutisms, right? People could
Right.
extrapolate that up to the national level, and we could talk about language that, Donald Trump started his campaign originally talking about he could shoot somebody on Main Street and still get
Right.
elected. He's been quoted as saying, "You loot, we shoot," and creating enemies. And so the language is on both sides, and that language of escalation is there. But at some point, somebody has to step up and say, enough's enough. We're not going to condone it anymore. That hasn't happened here. To your point, in Virginia, what's most likely to happen, historically, we know the trends. Historically, Virginia goes the opposite way of the current federal administration. All signs point to that. Yeah, all signs point to a Spanberger victory. How big it is, to your point, probably plays a part in some of those down ballot races.
Mhm.
Could we have the first split ticket in quite some time? What was the last one? I want
It's
to say
been a while.
2011.
I think
Yeah, it's
since
been a lot.
Foley or
Yeah,
early into those
yeah,
guys, I don't remember.
yeah. So I think there's a possibility there because Miares is definitely hammering some of that stuff home.
Mhm.
Um, and to your point, how tight it is will probably play a part. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing it on the state level. I mean, the state government has been pretty tight as far as who has leverage. And uh, I know from talking to some compatriots of mine who have served in the legislature and the General Assembly on both sides of the aisle. I expressed at one point, once you step into the arena, everybody kind of wants you to step further, right? It's like, oh,
Mhm.
you dipped your toe in the pool, great, jump all the way in. And so lots of folks have encouraged me to run for higher seats. And my thing was always, it would be hard to do as an independent
Yeah, it
in
is.
a state race, right? Because you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the financial backing of a party, etc.
And those things
But
matter, by the way, folks, and I
yeah,
want again, I'm gonna put a pin in it because this is
yeah,
a fireside chat and we like to dig into stuff. You're hitting the nail on the head here. Talented, good people who I think want to serve. I know I've gone back and forth many times. I want to do it, but boy, when you look at being an independent in this climate, you better be Glenn Youngkin. You better be Michael Bloomberg. I'm talking about the checkbook, right? You better
right.
be somebody that's got 100, 200, 300, 400, $500 million, and you can just write yourself 5, 10, $20 million
That's
check.
that's
Mark
right.
Warner, it's hard to do otherwise. So
It is, and so, but talking to those folks, they are all folks who have for the most part, cycled out of the General Assembly, and they look at me as somebody like it's more of what we need, right? Is this
yeah,
pragmatic approach that's willing to talk to everybody, that's willing to find solutions to problems, that doesn't want to sling mud, and
mhm,
and so they're like, if you could get in there, you could be almost like a cinema mansion style at the state level, where everybody's coming to you to get you to their side, and so there's a certain amount of power in that,
there
right?
it is.
My thing has never been about that. My thing has been about just changing the culture of politics in general. I don't like, I have two girls. We've spoken offline about this. And so when I got into the arena, initially it was a very selfish driven pursuit, right? Like I saw a world in which there were not enough models of leadership that I wanted my girls to see and emulate. And
Mhm,
so,
mhm.
well, if I don't see them, then let me provide it, right? Let me try and provide it for them. And in doing so, concentric circles out to a wider community, to a wider commonwealth. Let me continue to try and show a model of leadership that says, almost in a transgressive, rebellious way, we can be decent. We can argue, with a certain amount of
Passion.
fortitude and passion, right? But also understand that you are not my enemy. You are
Absolutely.
just my opponent in a debate. And the worst thing in my mind for me to do it, and harkens back to some Stoic philosophy, is to be like my opponent, right? Marcus Aurelius had this very famous saying, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And I
Absolutely.
don't view political opponents as enemies, but they are opponents. And the worst thing for me is to be just like my opponent. I want to be me
Yep.
authentically at
Yep.
all times and unapologetically. And for me, that is finding pragmatic solutions, being willing to listen to people, being willing to understand where they're coming from so that we can get somewhere better together.
So
And I
let's
don't see that at the state level now.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you, I know, went out on a few of the town halls and were with our two candidates for the House of Delegates. And, I know that I've heard this at our national level. I talk to Lindsay all the time. Governor Whitman is one of my mentors when I was a young woman. I right out of law school. I worked for her when she was governor of New Jersey. And to see her leave the Republican Party, man, the Whitmans and the Schlays go back hundreds of years, and for her to be like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to start a third party movement. We've all talked about, though, how difficult this is. And even though every bit of polling data, Brian, and I just literally saw a YouGov poll before you and I got on to record this podcast that says the approval for the president and the Congress is at its lowest ever, particularly with political independence. It's somewhere in the 70th percentile. And
Yeah.
it's climbing even on the partisan sides of Democrats and Republicans alike. And then you get to, though, when we're out there, you're out there, I'm out there, the candidates out there, people don't want to support a third party. Give me your thoughts of some of what you heard at the town halls. And I know that they were smaller, but, or what is it that you think it takes for us to, how do we build this third party movement here in Virginia?
Right. Yeah, and I think, as I've said, the polling that's coming out increasingly shows Americans feeling disenfranchised, disaffected by politics and the
Mhm.
divisiveness of it.
Mhm.
So the momentum's building, right? There's
Mhm.
there's a certain level of people being fed up.
Yep.
Uh, and and so that's fertile ground, right?
Yep.
The
Yep.
the you know the But we have to recognize the last successful attempt was 1842 and Reagan, or not Reagan, and Lincoln and the Republican Party becoming the first really last successful third party to enter. Now there was the Bull Moose Party with Teddy Roosevelt, that gained some momentum, and these were charismatic people who were thought leaders of their time, right? So I
Mhm.
think we need some of that driving in this moment, just clear messaging. It gets tough. I can attest to how tough it gets where people want you to nail down like ideologically aligned platforms.
Yeah. Like, where are you on choice? Where
Right,
are you on
right, right,
marriage? Where are
right.
you on
And
this? Where are you on?
exactly. And
Yep.
having to have conversations with people where it's like, this is a party that's not going to nail those down because we're open to a diversity of viewpoints. All we're saying, and for me personally, I've said it numerous times, in a country where 70 plus million people vote one way, 70 plus million people vote another way.
Uh
And
huh.
after the election, one of those is really happy and maybe a little spiteful, and
Right.
one of those is really disenfranchised and
Right. Right.
depressed.
Right.
And then there's 200 million people who are like, what's happening?
Right. Oh,
That's not a road to
half of them
prosperity.
participate, which is even
Yeah,
worse. I mean,
there's a
nothing
huge
makes
portion
me
of it.
more upset. It'll be interesting, when we get the results here in the Commonwealth next week, you can count on it'll be what they call a high voter turnout because I think the energy in this 2025 cycle is a lot like 2017, which was Trump's first term. You remember Virginia turned totally blue at that
Yeah,
point. And then, 18, even more blue. And I think that we're in that similar type election, but you're going to see a 50% turnout, might see 47%, might see 45 to 50%, but 50% are going to sit out of this election no matter what you do. And that's including a presidential cycle, which is always higher. And I
right,
don't think that the country will ever match the numbers from the 2020 election because of COVID.
right. Yeah,
It's
right.
that right to say, to your point, what is it that we're not doing right, or what is it that we have to do to connect those dots for those of us who are center right or some who are a little center left, because every indicator indicates that the country sits in the center. The fringes, fringe hard right, fringe hard left, are running the country right now, and you see the result.
Yes. And
What? How do we
I think
fix?
it's, yeah, I think it's hard. And I was speaking on this recently. Like it takes, I can attest, like I'd live it in a small town, microcosmic sort of way, right? Where I'm trying to be, uh, trying to eliminate any of that partisanness from local politics because it really muddies the water at this level.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing so, like it takes a lot of internal fortitude to stay solid in that messaging, right?
Yeah.
Because we are emotionally driven individuals. And
Yeah.
so it is easy to have your emotions get elevated and to respond kind of aggressively or
Mm-hmm.
emotionally to certain things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how it happens, right? And so it takes such a strength to stay rooted in that calm processing demeanor.
Uh-huh.
And so it's hard for people to do, but I think, you know, when I knocked on every door in Farmville, there was a through line. And granted, you know, the largest voting bloc is still, well, it's changing now, but for the longest time it was a boomer generation.
Mm-hmm.
That generation is now much older, but they still turn out to vote.
Yeah, they vote.
And they are easily influenced by fear because it just naturally happens as you get older. You fears change, everything feels
That's a certain network
disconnected.
that shall be nameless, but yes, you're
Right.
absolutely right.
Right. And so when I knocked on doors, it was a through line from folks who were on the left and folks who were on the right who both felt fear.
Mm.
And that was the thing that spoke to me. Okay, all we're doing, whether it's algorithmically through social, digital, or cable cryons, etc., is we're selling fear constantly. That's what elections are about. Fear.
So sad.
Fear of the other side. Fear of the other side. We need somebody who speaks once again. I mean, you can say what you want about Obama, but harken back to a semblance of hope and moving
Or
forward with
JFK.
progress,
Yeah.
right?
Calling.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're just not doing that effectively. I think people are going to be hungry for it. We talk about snapbacks in politics, and I think at some point, this continual reciprocal escalation of divisive tactics, there's going to be a snapback, and we just need to have people who are ready to speak um, to that sort of pragmatic, solution based, uh, and understanding that most of America's great incremental progress has happened through compromise. You can't have 340 million people in a country and think ideologically, I'm going to get them all
Right.
to the same place.
That's right.
It's not going to happen.
Yep.
The
That's right.
only way to do that is through authoritative tactics.
Right.
But that's not what America's about.
So put a pin in there. That's a
Yeah.
good place to take a pause and breathe and let you take a moment. And let me say this. Couple thoughts. One, I think you hit on some key things. I think the big difference now is, as I've talked to my parents and grandparents' generation at various times, you know, they're growing up in the World War II and then the Vietnam Civil Rights era. Totally different dynamic. And the country is galvanized in ways. The country is paying attention. The country is passionate. They're activists. They're doing things. We're seeing some of that now with the No Kings protests and other things. But let's talk about this authoritarianism and this rise of fascism and things that we see happening. And I think one of the problems for our republic here is the way we're set up. We're set up on a system of checks and balances. We're set up as a democratic republic. We really, you can tell, are out of our depth on, whoa, what do we do when somebody just starts disregarding the guardrails, the norms? And in many cases, we've frozen. I think part of the reason the Congress can't get it together is they absolutely, one side is fearful, to your point, and doesn't want to buck the guy who's the top guy. The other side is in the minority, so they can't do anything but try to push back and use whatever tactics they have. And so, Brian, what do we do when we have an electorate that's tuned out, at least 50% is, and we're seeing things happen right now that we've never seen? The Doge cuts, then you went to now the government shutdown. You're talking about getting rid of wholesale agencies like USAID and things that did good all around the world. These things are just done away with. That we've even renamed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. You know, the Secretary of Defense calls in the top generals, admirals, etc., and dresses them down and tells them they're fat, basically. And, I'm assuming they could use a little, trimming it up around the waist. Who couldn't? But what do we do? Because this is happening in real time. I'm curious of your thoughts on that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think one, I think we have to be careful, right? Because there is a tendency to, I mean, everything is generated around us being and people being outraged, right? That you have to remember that while there's a subset of folks now who are upset about things that are going on, there was a subset of Americans also upset during the last administration about things
Absolutely
that were
true.
going on, and
Absolutely.
they felt some very similar emotions, right? Like they felt there was some authoritative practices taken. And so we have to recognize that. We have to recognize as well that like sometimes there are certain things that have happened in the past that are happening again, and they're not as big. Now there are big moments. There are moments now that I think, and I'll tell you this on a personal level, increasingly, I've had friends from the right who have said, I feel like maybe I was duped. And that's the first time that some of these like really hardcore friends of mine that I have said that audibly. And in that moment, I don't say anything aggressive or say you're right or I say
Right,
yeah, yeah, nothing to that effect. But
right.
it's rather trying to dissect the moment and dissect the avenue by which they're seeing it so that we can get somewhere together, right? Because I think it's easy, like I spoke of earlier, to let emotions get a hold of you and to kind of fire out. But if you browbeat people, they're not going to listen to you. That's
Absolutely
just
true.
the way it is.
Absolutely true.
And so part of that is the fortitude to listen and to understand and then be able to like speak calmly about how we move forward, right? Like obviously you look at some of the things that are happening. I mean, one of the most egregious to me is do we all agree like drugs constantly flowing into this country are bad? Yes. But
Yes.
should we agree that just randomly blowing up boats of people without
Right.
any judicial process
International
or
waters.
anything? Right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's problematic.
Right. Well, it's gonna
There,
also cause a reaction, and I think that everything right now, whether it's tariffs or whatever it is, there's going to be a reaction to every action. I mean, it is the law of physics, it is the law of life, it is the law of karma. And you talked about something earlier, and you hinted at this, and I've read some of your social media posts and even some of mine that you've liked. You're a guy like me that cares about that well-being and that human beings being connected and being well and how we're treating each other and in treating each other civility. And I also think one of the things that's going to drive change, Brian, to your point is, you know, I remember, let's see, what's the first election I could vote in? 88, I think is the first election. So I voted for George Herbert Walker Bush. Daddy Bush was the first president I ever voted for. And, Dukakis versus Bush wasn't much of a choice, in my young opinion at the time. And I was raised in a pretty Democratic area. Being African American, probably most people were still Democrats at that time, switching from Republicans to Democrats, longer story. But when I think back to that and I think about now, we didn't have social media, we didn't have an internet, none of that existed. And one of the things that I hear voters talking about when you read the crosstabs in the polling or I'm on television and we debate these things, people are exhausted. They are
yeah,
emotionally spent with the constant 24/7 of the anger, the vitriol, the fear. People have
yeah,
anxiety. People are getting mental health challenges. This is like, and the young people, the anxiety is through the roof. You know this, your
yeah,
dad.
yeah.
And you work with young people, you go to soccer games, you do these things. Same here. And so, what is your thoughts about kind of how this all converges to a place where America seems very unhealthy to me right now, emotionally, spiritually, in every
Right.
way. Your thoughts?
We do, and I was thinking about this earlier and I was thinking about it in the moment along the lines of much of the partisan pearl clutching we see now is hypocrisy because everybody is in those escalation tactics, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it now even coming down to my state level with representatives who go on Facebook or go on social media and they just will pump like 6 to 7 posts a day of just red meat,
Mhm,
divisive,
mhm,
partisan stuff, right?
mm.
And what they're doing is they're building an audience, right? They've
Yep,
noticed that they
yep,
can build an
yep,
audience quickly within that silo. And what it does is it builds their brand. It gives, so everybody's building brand and building brand for partisan power, right? Building brand for the self interest in building brand for partisan power.
absolutely,
Neither of those things is in the public interest.
right. Totally
Neither of
agree,
those things is in the public interest.
totally agree.
And that is where a lot of this breakdown happens is we have leaders who are not rising to the level of the office. They're falling to the level of partisanship. And so if the leaders of this country aren't going to step up and try to point in a direction that's a better way, then the people are going to have to do so. And they're going to have to signal to the politicians that we've had enough. We've
Mhm.
had enough of this. I don't know. It's going to take a lot because I was talking about like algorithms the other day. And it was like somebody else had this idea. Wouldn't it be great? Like I noticed with a lot of my posts, I'll get cross pollination from Democrats and Republican friends who like it and interact positively with the stuff I put out there. And it's like, wouldn't it be great if the algorithms recognized that and elevated those
But
as
they don't,
opposed
they
to the
don't.
divisive stuff, right?
There's bots.
Because,
There are
yeah,
literally bots from
yeah,
China, from
right,
Russia, and other countries who figure out and listen, these guys, communist countries like Russia, China, and all, they have they're masters of this stuff. They're masters of propaganda. They're masters of disinformation and misinformation, which is something that I find so disheartening, Brian. The truth is no longer the truth. Nobody knows what the truth is anymore because it's so muddied and like you said, both sides are throwing bombs in different ways. Both sides are feeding red meat. Basic things that are common damn sense now, like some of the stuff we've been talking about. People, well, I don't know that's true or that's your opinion. No, actually, the Constitution does say some things about who can do what, when, where, and why. That's actually
yeah.
factually true. There are
Well,
limitations on the executive. That's a fact.
yeah, to your point, that's where I think the wins and the common purpose can be had is in focusing really intently on those first principles, right? There
Absolutely.
are some first principles this country was founded on that we have aspired to
Yep.
reach, and it's been a continual process and we have not achieved reaching those aspirations by any stretch. But we have, in my estimation, as they say, the arc has continued to bend towards justice. And so we would hope that if we can focus on some of those core first principles and start to draw people back into that we can build some common purpose again. Because right now, there's no common purpose in
So let's
America.
talk about how we get there. Let's get past the 2025 elections, which we'll know the results here next week. But let's talk about the midterms. Let's talk about 250 years,
Yeah,
July 4th,
right?
2026, the
Perfect opportunity.
semi-sessional. Well, I tell you, it's almost like something you'd get out of a book. And so this country's been tested in ways she's never been tested before. So the question becomes, will we have free and fair elections? We talked a little bit about the redistricting. Will we um be able to put a check on a executive that has done things again none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes, nor have our parents, at least not in this country. And so my question to you is probably a hard one, but I'd love to know your thoughts. One, I want to know what you think about the midterms and if the Democrats take power, will they be able to be an effective check on the executive for the last 2 years? And will we get things back normal or not? First question. And the second thing is, what are your thoughts on what we've seen the last 10 months at the federal level and the breach and the overreach on those guardrails and those checks and balances? Is this something we're gonna get past, or are we in more trouble than we think?
Yeah, I think okay. So I think one midterms, just historically, my guess would be that Democrats would take some control and that you'd have your normal sort of lame duck style to a certain degree. But then you also have an executive who's run roughshod over a lot of process and just done whatever he wants to do.
Well,
Congress,
that's
for the
your
most part, our congressional legislators have abdicated their duty to a large
yeah.
extent. on a
Yeah.
lot of angles.
Brian, put a
Uh,
pin in it, but I wanna get you back to the
yeah,
redistricting last point, though. California's entered the fray,
right.
Virginia, big
Yeah,
surprise there, didn't see that one coming because
yeah.
we do have a nonpartisan redistricting here, a
It
commission.
just happened. Yeah, it just happened. Yeah.
And I think Maryland's gonna fall suit. So what you see is the Democrats saying we're gonna put up a firewall. If Texas is gonna go do this and maybe Indiana and some of the other red states, then we've got to do it. Where does that end us up? And I think that's a question that's real.
It doesn't end us in anywhere good. Like I'm in disagreement with personally in disagreement with Virginia wading into partisan redistricting right after we just had some relatively independent redistricting happen. I don't think it ends anywhere in a good place, and I would posit to both Democrats and Republicans, and this is I'm not the first to say it, but in my personal opinion, like our current president he has a history of being very self-focused, right? Like
Bombastic.
one, he's just self-focused. Like there's a lot of focus on what he can get out of things. Everything's transactional, and the majority of his life has been, how do I do transactions so that they benefit me,
Yep.
right? And so I don't know that he's changed any. I mean, I don't know many 70-plus-year-olds who change how they operate at that decade.
Amen.
And so I don't see it from him as well. And I think you would have to be really disingenuous to say he's not like an immoral person on many scales. I mean, he cheated on every wife he's had. He's cheated on his taxes. He's cheated at golf. Like, it's just it's part of his makeup and lack of moral makeup, which I think has been the hardest thing for a lot of people is rectifying that moral character and doing the gymnastics to say there are some things he's done that I've liked, right? And for me, even there have been things he's done that I
Sure.
liked. Um, but I have a hard time with the moral character piece because I think it sets a tone from the top that filters through society. And I often tell people, and this is a side note, and I apologize, I often tell people during the Clinton administration, I was a young man, and Clinton got caught having a
I worked on
dalliance with
that
a
committee during the
yeah,
impeachment. I remember it.
right. Yeah. And so, but for a young man like me, it gave me a bit of permission because I thought to myself,
Yeah, he
okay, if I'm really smart, if I'm a smart person who's charismatic, I
Mhm.
have a certain leeway in which I can get away with perhaps doing things in relationships that aren't morally upright because it's okay. I'm smart. I'm capable.
Where
Da,
I'm
da, da.
smart or what
Right.
it is.
Right. And so what are the permissions that we've now given these
Yep.
next generations,
Yep.
right? And so that's something that concerns me. But what really concerns me more than anything else is that I think there are very smart people in this world, smarter than the people who are currently in this administration. And if they get power next, whether that's the Democratic side, what does that then mean if we continue the escalation, right?
You're
When
right, because they're already talking about they're gonna tear down the ballroom and they're gonna do
right, the immediate response is we're going to tear this down, right?
what then I'm asking myself, "Well, damn, we gonna put up stuff and rip it down and put up stuff and rip" like, we're out of control right now. We're
Yeah,
just out of control, and you're right, and I also think and I wanna get your thoughts on this because you touched on it earlier. You said something I think is very critical to the forward party's forward progress over the next decade, and that is understanding that you gotta go back to the Tea Party in 2010 and 2012. And you got to understand that there was a group of people, like you said, in this country, mostly white, mostly working poor, rural, some in the, middle class, but they really felt like those Reagan Democrats felt like they had been left aside. And then there was DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you ask the regular average person in this country, do you think diversity is good? They would say, of course, it's good to have that. If you ask them, do we want to include people? Well, of course you do. I think when you get to equity, people get a little nervous. But I think that there was a lot of silencing that a lot of white Americans felt like they had to go along with things, and they were watching their country change, and then all of a sudden gay people could get married, and then there was pronouns, and then there was transgender, and then there was boys and girls sports. So it was like this thing, and some of us were trying to warn the powers that be, you're making a mistake on this, you're not reading the tea leaves, because the average person doesn't want to see this, even if you do what you want to do, but I don't want to know about it. And I think what Trump tapped into actually quite brilliantly was he tapped into that discontent and that anger and said, I'm your guy. I'm your retribution. I am your dude, and I'm going to dislike the people you dislike, and I'm going to make those illegals pay, and those blacks and those out of control white women, and they need to get back in the kitchen and they need to have babies. And that's real. Like, your thoughts on that? Like, I mean, I'm.
Yeah, I do agree that there was like such an advancement of sort of a cultural tisk-tisking
Yes.
and sort of telling people what they could say to such a degree
But,
that there was a natural rebellion against that.
yep.
And I can attest to, friends of mine and family members of mine and people who felt that. I can remember in 2016 when Trump first came out, lots of people said, "Great, I can say what I want to say now."
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that sentiment, right? And some of it was earned. To your point, there's America has always incrementally advanced,
Mm-hmm.
right? There was a lot of advancement in certain cultural ways
You think
recently,
fast.
and I think the whether however you feel about the celebration of it or the continual push for even quicker advancement, there wasn't a recognition that there was a large generation who was going to struggle with that,
Absolutely.
and and
Amen. You nailed it. We agree.
right, to have that understanding is not to say that what we're doing is wrong, but it's an acknowledgement that in the greater good of getting to where we get to, we have to kind of hold people's hands a little bit as we walk there together.
Dialogue, the bridges,
Yeah,
have courageous
and yeah,
conversation, and that
and
wasn't
yeah,
happening. It was being
that
shoved
wasn't
down
happening.
people's throats, and this whole debate we're having about free speech right now, and you and I are gonna need, like, 5 podcasts to do this, but, and we'll do it again for sure, but, the free speech, the law firms, the university, everything's about dear leaders' fragile ego, and I've never seen anything like that before, so as an American, I'm kind of like, I don't know what's happening, and I'm a very informed, engaged, like you person. So, what do you think the average person thinks about all this chaos when the government shut down as of November 1st? There won't be SNAP benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a certain, I'm in rural Virginia, and there's a certain amount of my friends who are on the right side of politics who aren't like terribly concerned about large swaths of what this administration does, right?
Sure.
There are little snippets where certain things break through. Right? When some of that free speech started coming up post Charlie Kirk, there was definitely talking to folks, friends of mine who are on that side, who were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, we're taking this a little too far. Here's this guy who was apparently this
Mhm.
icon of free speech, and yet now you're trying to shut down people's free speech
Yep.
about him. Like
Absolutely.
that seems hypocritical."
Absolutely.
And that's for me the biggest thing is there's been a lot of inconsistency, and I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time with that at my local level when people are inconsistent, but I have a hard time with it in general is
I don't like it in my
inconsistencies.
relationships. Do you? I don't
Right.
like it in anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not fun. So let's wrap this up and give me your say anything you want to say, whatever you want folks to know. But again, you and I are part of the Forward Party here in Virginia, and again, building a new political party is tough. And it takes lots of time and lots of resources. But I agree with you that I believe there will be such an exhaustion and weariness come probably 26 to 28 is going to be a fascinating period. I hope that we are able to build it. But if there was something you wanted to say to the people in the Commonwealth of Virginia or in our country right now, because people will watch this at all levels, what would you like to say about us as we're going into our 250th birthday and where we are and where you'd like us to be?
Yeah, I mentioned this. There's a great quote by the author Sebastian Junger, and it's freedom from oppression is not the same as freedom from obligation.
That's
I'm
good.
probably paraphrasing that a bit. And so I think people need to remember that, right? As I walk through life, I'm always cognizant of my obligation to my fellow citizens, to my family, to this community, to the Commonwealth, to the country.
Amen.
And when I think about what I want for all of those things, I have to think about it from a holistic lens that recognizes that not everybody's going to agree with everything I think. And that's okay. What's important is our ability to effectively communicate it to each other and to listen for the purpose of trying to understand so that we can bridge gaps and find common purpose again. A lot of the violence and the ugliness I see in the world is from a lack of common purpose in this country. And to your point earlier, and some of that, and some of those social movements, we tore down a little bit of our common purpose. And I'm not sure we found how to bridge it back. But I think we can find it in the first principles of this country and in the first principles of moral character. Stanley McChrystal, the general, has a new book out on character, and I think it's a very valuable read. And as somebody who, one attends church and follows Jesus in the Bible, but also reads philosophy like Stoicism, etc.
You dropped some
Everything,
names here. I'm
yeah,
impressed. Marcus Aurelius, Sebastian
that's right.
Younger,
That's
doing well. I'm
right.
impressed. I
Everything is centered around like the four cardinal virtues, right?
right.
And so if we can get back to those sort of core principles of being good human beings and
Amen.
really holding ourselves personally to
Accountable.
account for those things, we can change the direction we're going in. And I think it's imperative because if we continue on the reciprocal mimetic escalation of all these tactics, it doesn't lead anywhere good for the future of this country. And that's of concern to me for the next generations.
One of my political sheroes is the late Senator Margaret Chase Smith. Susan Collins holds her seat now, and that's never been okay with me because Margaret Chase Smith was the only woman in the Senate in the 1950s. She had the courage to take on Joseph McCarthy. Her declaration of independence, if you will, her declaration of conscience, is something that every politician should have to swear an oath to, and that is what we've been talking today. Having a moral center, understanding, because there are absolutes. We do know what morality is, folks. We know what's right and we know what's wrong. And you know what, Brian, that's been blurred very badly. And we're telling our kids now, to your earlier point about what you saw in Clinton as a young guy, this leader and leadership now, they get on Twitter, the vice president of the United States, making excuses for 35, 40-year-old men, calling them kids, and they can say the N word and they can
Right.
do Nazi stuff. That's not what leaders do. And it doesn't matter what your political party is right and wrong is wrong. And so those first principles that you talk about, freedom, the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness that Jefferson talked about, I think we have to get back to that. And so I thank you a lot for this dialogue. Again, we're going to have to do more because we'll never get it all done in one podcast. But last thoughts, give me your predictions for the Virginia elections as we're wrapping up here. What do you expect to see on election day?
Yeah, I think, and this is not, to be completely transparent, I often write myself in for a lot of
That's all good.
elections.
All good.
People get frustrated with me for it, but if I don't like either candidate, I'll write myself in. My prediction, though, is that Virginia will follow its usual pattern of voting in the opposite direction of and checking the power of the executive. I think that is historically what Virginia does, and my guess, and from all the there's plenty of partisan polling you can find that will soothe whatever soul you have, but I think most of the polling I've seen suggests that's most likely the case.
Yeah, and the government shutdown doesn't help the Republican.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be a bad.
no.
I
Well,
do.
it just everything feels chaotic and uncertain.
Yes.
And Virginia as a purple state with a heavily federal employment population, right? Yeah, that they're already. This is the first week I think where they've missed those checks
Yes.
fully in reality, and so I think that will come to bear.
Tell folks how they can follow you on social media and learn more about you, what you do, what you're
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, Mayor Brian Vincent. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I am a pretty readily available elected official.
Good for you.
Yeah, almost too much so, but I want people to have a real touch point to a politics that doesn't throw firebombs and that seeks to bring us all together. So I try to stay out there.
Not left, not right,
But
forward.
forward.
All right, Brian. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk again
Th-
soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. I appreciate it.